To people who happen to be admirers of Spanish Civil War literature, Jackson, as the headquarters of the Mississippi Summer Project, is likely to conjure up visions of Madrid as the capital of the Spanish Loyalists. Physically, Jackson could hardly look less like Madrid, but the Summer Project, a statewide program of voter registration and other civil rights activities being carried out by some 600 volunteers and some 100 paid workers, is so thoroughly caught up in a tangle of frenetic planning and propagandizing that a reader of George Orwell and Ernest Hemingway half expects to come across military strategists mapping out campaigns against mountain villages, or to see clusters of ideologists arguing and plotting in small, dark bars, their conversations occasionally interrupted by a stray bomb. One difference, of course, is that the Council of Federated Organizations, or COFO, the amalgam of civil rights groups that runs the Summer Project, does not actually control even the part of Jackson where it is permitted to exist, and there are constant reminders of who does. A number of editorialists and columnists on the Jackson daily newspapers are not merely segregationists, but segregationists of the type who are inclined to indicate their position by referring to Martin Luther King Jr. as the Reverend Dr. Extremist Agitator Martin Luther King Jr., or by suggesting that President Johnson's theme song should be The High Yellow Rose of Texas, or by telling cannibal jokes. The community bulletin board of a local radio station occasionally includes, among reports of rummage sales and church suppers, the announcement that Americans for the Preservation of the White Race will hold its weekly meeting that evening, and all interested white people are invited to attend. The chatty gray-haired lady in charge of a local bookstore, whose inventory appears to begin with the writings of the John Birch Society and move to the right, is available for political arguments with the civil rights workers she refers to amiably as those COFO things. One can telephone Dial for Truth, a recorded announcement by the Jackson Citizens Council of the evils that race mixing has brought upon the world during the previous week. And the Mississippi Numismatic Exchange Incorporated has a sign in its window reading, "Kennedy $50, 25 cents. That's all we think they're worth." The sign says, in smaller letters, that the case that goes along with one costs 50 cents. Still, Jackson, which prides itself on maintaining law and order, has been relatively careful about protecting civil rights workers, and there has not been enough civil rights action within the city limits to provide what COFO people tend to call a confrontation. All in all, the city is more of a communications and planning center than a scene of battle. At the COFO headquarters, a storefront office on Lynch Street in the Negro Business District, efficient white girls in cotton print dresses decorate the walls daily with fresh incident reports, listing arrests or beatings of COFO workers in other parts of the state. But whenever the stray bomb lands, as on the second day of my visit, when 2 workers were beaten, though not seriously, just a few blocks from the COFO office, the first reaction is that somebody must have broken a truce or wandered out of a demilitarized zone by mistake. At the office, COFO workers in overalls and work shirts who have come into Jackson on errands from small towns in the Delta stroll in and out, and members of the office staff shuttle back and forth incessantly between a row of typewriters and a row of telephones. On Farish Street, in another part of the Negro Business District, 2 groups of lawyers use offices across the street from one another, each on the top floor of a drab 2-story building, to deal with the litigation brought on by the constant civil rights arrests. In an office nearby, the National Council of Churches, which has provided ministers, lawyers, and the training facilities for the Summer Project, regularly holds orientation sessions for new arrivals, and a group of respectable-looking clergymen regularly watch quietly as a COFO worker demonstrates how to protect one's kidneys when knocked down. "Is it considered permissible to get in a punch or two and then run?" a young minister asked the day I was there. "How good a runner are you?" the COFO demonstrator asked in reply. Over in the white business district, Workmen are installing an interior staircase in the expanded FBI office, which now occupies one floor and part of another of the new First Federal Savings and Loan building, and is still in the unpackaging stage, with crates on the floor and pictures of J. Edgar Hoover leaning against the wall. At the state capitol, a few blocks to the north, where a statue of Governor and Senator Theodore Bilbo, the late racist, dominates the ground floor, and vividly tinted portraits of Mississippi's two Miss Americas are enshrined in the rotunda, investigators for the State Sovereignty Commission, the agency charged with preserving segregation, go through Negro newspapers, civil rights literature, and The Worker in order to keep track of which left-wingers are where. All in all, there are so many visitors in town that it is practically impossible to rent a car, and the provision of restaurant and hotel accommodations for the visitors has become a minor industry. Under these circumstances, a conversation about the Catalan separatists or the anarchists of the POM might not sound out of place, but instead the visitors talk about SNCC, called SNCC and standing for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the National Council of Churches, or the LCDC, Lawyers Constitutional Defense Committee, or the National Lawyers Guild, or the APWR, Americans for the Preservation of the White Race, or the Citizens Council, or the Klan.